everyone. Chris Shubert here from CNSG. Welcome to the latest edition of the Zoom, where we zoom in on industry thought leaders. My guest today is Scott Kinka, CTO of Evolve IP. Hello, Scott. Thanks for joining.
How you doing, Chris? Good to see you.
Doing very well, sir. Thanks for asking. Not enough people ask me that, so I appreciate that. So, Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah. Well, I've been the CTO. I'm one of the founding partners of Evolve IP, and I've been with the business since inception. That's about 12 years now.
Wow.
Before that, I worked at a carrier in the Mid-Atlantic called ATX Communications, which ultimately became part of Broadview Networks. So I had that history there. And before that, I was doing consulting way back at the beginning of the advent of the internet in the mid 90s, building web pages and, getting dangerous, right?
Yeah, we've all been there, and we've gone through the valleys and the roller coaster along the way.
Right.
But Evolve IP is, not to play off your name, but has been an evolving company over the last several years as it's really moved into being less of a traditional carrier and more of a cloud enablement company. In fact, you even refer to yourselves as the cloud strategy company. What can you tell us about who Evolve IP is today, and how you look on as this is your baby? How has it changed over the last 12 years?
That's a great point, and please, pun intended, right? I mean, we named the business knowing we weren't going to be able to have a technology conversation where we didn't end up giggling with our prospect about the number of times that we said evolve, right? And the point behind IP is you can look at IP a couple of different ways, right? One way to look at it is internet protocol. Another way to think about it is intellectual property, right? And the idea here for us at the time was we knew when we started the business, and we really got into market about 2008, that the way that businesses were going to transact acquiring technology was intrinsically changing, right? We were at the beginning. I don't think we called it cloud then. That started happening in 2010, 2011. But, businesses were beginning to outsource to others data centers in an as-a-service model at that point. There was also another interesting thing that was going on at that time, which was it was 2008, which, the last great recession that we had was going on at that time. And businesses were capital constrained, right? And so financial buyers started to ask the question, do I really need to go plunk down gear on that I'm really not going to see a return on, or can I just go buy this as a service? I kind of look at it akin to, in the early days of manufacturing towards the turn of the century, if you wanted to make something, you had to also generate your own power. Right? So you weren't just making widgets, you were also making power. It's kind of the same thing now. So we were thinking about that sort of, utilitizing of IP as that, as that went. So in 2008, we started the business. We started it right out of the chute as an over-the-top unified communications player. So we were doing what then we called hosted PBX. The business, our customers quickly drove us towards contact center, largely because the offerings that were available to them from, sort of the behemoth bellwethers at that time, Cisco and Avaya and others, were getting long in the tooth, and they were hard to administrate. So they were looking for offerings there. And then, we just sort of followed the bouncy ball, right? UC led to contact center. Contact centers led to situations where, you've got transactional seasonal employees. And businesses were coming to us saying, hey, how do I simplify turning this employee up and down, not just in communications? And that led us into computing, where we built a big infrastructure practice. We built a DR practice, and I spend a lot of time today really focusing on end user computing. So desktop as a service is a really big, arena for us as well. So the business really has morphed to sort of chase, what's happening inside the market, right? What's the next thing the IT guy or a gal doesn't want to do, and what's happened as we've begun to move into that transaction cycle as we get to the end of our first contract or getting into our second contract, and that IT buyer is going to the boss and saying, hey, I got to buy some new servers, and the boss is saying, hey, who's that company we didn't buy stuff last time? Can they do this too, right? And that's just sort of how the company's evolved over time.
Awesome. Awesome. You mentioned, you hit some terms that are near and dear to my heart. You talked hosted PBX, you talked cloud.
Sure.
We've seen hosted PBX become UC and CCaaS. We've seen cloud computing kind of become just part of the overall digital transformation strategy.
Yeah.
Along the way, we've seen an explosion of new carriers and suppliers in this particular space. I mean, you know how competitive UCaaS and Office 365 and CCaaS has become.
Mm-hmm.
With that in mind, when you look at the different types of customers that Evolve IP fits for, what is your sweet spot? What do you
Great
guys
question.
love to dig your teeth into?
Sure. So we talked about how broad the product offering was: UCCC, computing offerings, and then inside that computing offering, we were a reseller of Office 365. You brought up a really good point there, right? And the growth there is immense. What really is why we've been able to maintain our quality with such a broad swath of products is because we focus pretty extensively on the mid market. So that's first, right? And by mid market, this is what I mean. Large enough to have an IT department. So a customer that we can buy from, or can buy from us, I should say, but small enough to not have enough resources there, right? So put this in the 100 to 5,000, maybe even micro segmenting it more, 250 to 2,500 employees. We have an IT buyer. They know how to deploy technology. They just know that they don't have the time, they don't have the budget, they don't have the money, or they don't have the experience to do the next thing that they need to do. And we're generally just looking for that one opening, right? Once we get in, we can cross-sell across the products, right? So in any given year, 30% of our net new revenue comes from customers increasing their product penetration with us. So what partners should think about is, really the operative question for Evolve IP is, what's that next IT project that you don't have the money, don't have the budget, don't have the knowledge, don't have the experience to do, and had you considered putting that in the cloud? We need that foothold, assuming it's in that market space that we talked about, and then we can get the buyer to increase their spend from there. I'd say another thing that's interesting about the sweet spot is we have concentrations of customers in very specific areas. We built our cloud to be compliant. So, generally speaking, what does that mean? It means, HIPAA, PCI, and then some of the other longer tail compliance scenarios. We're high trust certified. Mm-hmm. So that means we have a concentration of customers in banking and finance, in retail and food services, in healthcare, in hospitality. Those that are generally holding credit card information or holding health information.
That's an interesting way to frame it, because I ask that the sweet spot question a lot, and I get a lot of different type of answers. But I love the fact that you really keyed in on folks that are big enough to have an IT decision maker, because obviously there's a segment of customers that our partner community deal with that don't have that. They're too small in that regard, and probably aren't a great fit for Evolve IP. But the ones that have the large scale IT, 250 people deep, that's maybe not the sweet spot there. But those folks that are looking to grow or strain to grow and need a partner to help them get to that next level, that's a great fit for Evolve IP.
Absolutely.
Well, obviously, any of those guys that have compliancy concerns. Be that as it may, to challenge you a little further, though,
Sure.
As mentioned, it is still a crowded space, even within that limiting factor that you put some walls around it for us.
Yeah.
If you had to, look at the distinguished competition out there, what do you say you do better than anybody else out there?
Yeah, I think because of the breadth of product that we have. And listen, sometimes, we say around here all the time, sometimes your biggest blessing is your biggest curse, and vice versa, right? So it depends on the complexity of the deal and the way you enter to really understand where the Evolve IP opportunity is. What we do better than everybody else, particularly in our space, is we do more. Now, that's an easy statement to make, right? It's a general statement.
Sure.
What does that mean? What it means is that, here's what's happened. As the cloud has proliferated, we have forced our customers from the data center, which they were happy to give up, right? But if you think about it, we've put them in the integration business, right? If they go out and they go buy UC from one of the bellwethers, and they go buy contact center from a Gartner market quadrant leader, or they go do computing with Amazon or Microsoft, the IT department is then in the business of making that stuff work well together. Right. If they deploy a desktop solution in Amazon's cloud, they need to make sure that their, Ring Central or Five9's client runs well in it. Right. It's on the customer, right? What we do better than anybody else is because, and I say IT buyer for a very specific reason, right? Is that's valuable to an IT buyer, maybe not a business buyer. right? Maybe not a small business buyer. They're just going, what's the best price? Who's got the prettiest interface? I'll make all that work. But what they're not thinking about is what happens when I have an identity on every platform? How do I deal with quality of a phone call when I'm deploying it in a virtual desktop scenario? What happens when my phone presence when my wife calls isn't taken into account for my agent who is available on an over-the-top contact center, right? These are the integration challenges that mid-market, really all businesses have with the cloud, but we focus on that mid-market buyer because that IT person knows they're going to have those challenges. So they see the value in that integrated stack of products. Our various pieces working well together, that's our job, right? And we're taking customers out of the integration business that the clouds put them in.
Awesome. Kind of keying in on one of your other differentiators, was recently in a seminar, I heard a lot about the interfaces you have with Azure and some of the unique applications Evolve IP has in working with an Azure environment. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Microsoft is just a tremendous part of our strategy. Microsoft is the bear in the woods and your frenemy all at the same time, right? I mean, I can't tell, years ago, people would say, hey, is Microsoft coming after your email? Sure, they put everyone out of the hosted exchange business. We had a pretty big hosted exchange business going, right? But in typical Microsoft cycles, they then Office 365 hits it, and then they go, hey, you know what? This whole talking to customers thing and billing customers directly, that didn't work out. Evolve, you were pretty good at Exchange. Right now, we're one of the largest resellers of Office 365 in the Mid-Atlantic, and we're partnering with them again. Right, you could say the same thing about where they've come with the PBX. Right, I mean, OCS was going to PBX, going to be a PBX. Link was going to be a PBX. Now we've got Cloud PBX in Teams. Still needs dial tone from somebody.
Right.
So we've always remained close to Microsoft as we go. We know what the Microsofts, what the Amazons, what the VMwares of this world are going to do. And what they're going to do basically is build a product, build a premise, get adoption, and then look for their field partners, their service providers, their VARs to make the solution real. Right. And that's really what we've done, with a whole, Cisco and Microsoft and VMware over time, specifically as it speaks to VMware. To Microsoft. Office 365 has become one of the largest drivers inside of our business. It's easy to get it in resale. We price it, at rack rates that are there. But what we provide are the plus-up services on top of it that customers would generally have to do on their own, right? So what's the consulting? What's the governance? How do I tie it into my PBX? Those types of things. And then on the computing side of our business, we recognize that every work stream doesn't necessarily belong in a private cloud like ours, right? There's some workloads like web pages or video content or things like that just belong, no matter how secure a business needs to be, in a public cloud, right? It's inexpensive, it's scalable, it makes sense. We know we need to play nice, right? Because there's just solutions that belong in certain clouds. They belong in certain places. And we're moving towards a multi-cloud economy, at this point. Despite the fact that we have, a broader breadth of product, we know there's going to be, CRMs that they use. There's going to be billing platforms that they use. There's going to be hyperscale that they use from time to time. So we're a participant in Microsoft Express routes. We're a participant in Amazon Direct Connect. So when we build a customer's network, they can extend that network into a hyperscale cloud like Azure, and it can play nice and be on network with the rest of the services that they have with Evolve.
Nice play. One of the things that's interesting today is obviously that conflict between the pure play best of breed providers and then the folks that try to do a little bit of everything. You have a nice fit there of doing a little bit of everything, but also having the ability to embrace pure play providers for various elements. Nice.
Yeah, no question.
Well, one thing I always like to hear, and all of our partners are always curious about, is a win. Tell us a little bit about a recent case study or of a customer that Evolve IP really made a difference for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting one. I was racking my brain to try and come up with one that told a good story that would be kind of universally applied.
Well, you already have 100,000 users, so it takes a little to whittle that down a bit.
Yeah, and today, by the way, I mean, I didn't mention earlier what our spread is. We've extended the Evolve IP brand into Europe. Today there's about 450,000 users on the network. Of various services. So the business is growing, at a pretty big clip. So here's a win. Here's an idea, right? So we were brought in what we had was a PE-led roll-up. We've all run into them, right? Of a healthcare organization. They're providing non-ambulatory healthcare services, and what the PE was doing was buying regional businesses that did the same thing. And you can apply this at doctor's offices, dentist offices, veteran practice, the whole 9 yards. But this was a non-ambulatory distributor of medical devices for all intents and purposes. And they were buying businesses up. And they had originally brought us in to look at UC and basic contact center for their edge sites. So what they wanted to do was say, hey, Joe used to call Betty at the local office, and they still wanted Betty to have the opportunity to answer the phone first, but then it would roll to corporate, right? So we did that at first. That quickly grew into a 400 location, roughly 5 to 8 people at each location operation, which then at that point we were providing better reporting and service than the PBXs and contact center solution at the headquarters location that had 2,500, 3,000 employees. So at that point, then we went ahead and replaced that. Right. Then what happened was they came back and they said, hey, you know what? Here's another thought. As we're buying practices, they have IT in them. So what do we do about, while we might have new PCs and we might have new switches, we might have all that, the reality of it is to kind of wrangle and manage that under a single scenario is very hard. We can just write off all that depreciating asset at the time of purchase. So how do we create a X number per employee model that we can just take out to the businesses, write off all the existing tech and say, hey, for $125, email, desktop that has access to all their back-end systems, contact center, and, NUC. And we were able to build a model like that. Today, that business, has on us. And an interesting story, by the second year in there, they had a portion of the business that wanted to make a play towards using a best of breed, single application, as you mentioned, in one of these categories. Tried it, didn't work, ended up folding in under the rest of the business as it went. Today, this business is about 10,000 end user opportunity. And across that base, we're providing to some users UC, contact center, desktop, Office 365. Others, it's a smaller stack that's centered around communication. But it's a really interesting story for a couple of reasons. One, it demonstrates that oftentimes PE roll-ups are a really good opportunity, right? Because they can sort of write off all the old IT and just sort of, you build it one time and this is the story you get at every office. Second one is it really shows how having this breadth of product just sort of grows itself, right? All we have to do collectively with our partners is take care of the customer, and they're going to continue to elect into the cloud model, as it grows over time. 3, I think it shows, some of our specialty in the healthcare, industry as one of the industries that we focus in, which is never was there a challenge that said we couldn't use your solution because of something our regulatory guy, ran into the IT room and screamed stop over, right? So decent story there. I hope that helped.
No, it was a great story. And the only thing I would add to that, just for our partner community that's listening to this here today, is, this is an opportunity that's not unusual for Evolve IP. And Evolve IP can get in there on that entry level opportunity, be it the hosted PBX, old term, the UCaaS, potentially the CCaaS, or even the desktop as a service, and then use those to pull through larger revenue opportunities. These aren't things that one of our CNSG partners has to be an expert on. They have their Evolve IP guide that's going to help them get there. And on that note, for our CNSG family listening and watching this here today, what's the best way to interface with Evolve IP if they like what they've heard here today?
A great question. So we have an expansive channel organization that faces, our partners that are affiliated with, the different, with the different masters and the different people that we have in the partner community. CNSG's primary resource inside of Evolve IP is a channel manager named Dana Dempsey. And then what we do, you're smiling, you've obviously engaged with Dana in the past.
She's a rock star.
Absolutely.
Rock star.
The way our organization works is that our channel advisors will essentially sort of prep and qualify a deal. And then what they'll do is they'll choose a salesperson who may be geographically located or have expertise in that particular vertical or in that particular product line, most appropriate to get inside to that customer. And I think what's important to note too is, and I thank you for saying, we can get in there with the one product, is we do that model because very rarely is the prospect a unicorn, right? The unicorn's the company that wants to buy everything right now. You know, and that's not the play, right?
Yeah, and generally, if they are trying to buy everything right now, that's the one you're going to have the credit check issue with, or goes out of business.
Exactly. So what you're really looking to do, you know, I tell partners when you're first getting started. I mean, and listen, most of our partners will fall in one of two categories. Either they're sort of historically VAR. So they're comfortable with the computing Office 365 desktop conversation, or they're kind of historically interconnect traditional telecom agent, and they're comfortable with the hosted PBX and maybe some of the context center conversation. And you know, my answer back to those partners is it's twofold. One, feel free to ask the questions that you know, because there's still an opportunity for Evolve IP, and you just need to get us in the door on one of those topics, right? The second thing is, don't be afraid to ask questions that you don't know the answer to. Right? Because if you think about it, if you're a traditional, more traditional telecom agent or interconnect, and there's a VAR over here, the person who asks the question the first time is going to be the one who potentially has that landing product. They can get the rest of it over time by leveraging our experience. So feel comfortable to ask those questions. People sometimes ask me, hey, what's the one question I would ask for Evolve IP? I mentioned it earlier, but I want to call it out again. What's the one project that you have coming up this year in IT or communications that you don't have the budget for, don't have the people for, don't have the time for, and would you consider outsourcing that to a cloud vendor? It's really that simple. And that just begins the conversation.
That's a great question, and not one I generally hear. And so I kudos to you for that one. And one other plug I'd like to give Evolve IP is you guys have a cloud playbook, which is one of the easily the best documents I've seen out there for taking a sales partner from beginning knowledge to knowing enough to be dangerous out there in the field and ask the right questions so that they can tee up stuff for Dana and team. So definitely encourage our partners to take a look at that.
Absolutely.
So this has been an absolute pleasure, Scott. I appreciate you being a guest on the Zoom here. I've got one final question for you.
Yeah.
You know, it's in this somewhat turbulent industry, it is rare for me to get a chance to talk to a founder of a company, much less someone that has been in the cloud field since before cloud was cool, been in there for 12 years plus, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about the evolution, hosted to UC, cloud to digital transformation. If you're putting on your technologist hat and looking into the future of 2020 and beyond, what do you think is the opportunity that partners should be looking at as that next emerging growth area? What's hot? What's coming up?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll do it quickly, but I'll hit you on two areas. Right, one is the emergence of work stream collaboration. So, and what do I mean by that? Today, most of our UC tools are user-centric, phone number-centric, right? Scott and Chris-centric, where workstream collaboration really is a category that kind of, the Slacks of the world, sort of taking that whole model and building the UC inverse to say, it's not going to be about phone numbers and people. It's going to be about us coming to a topic, right? And interacting inside of a topic, instant messaging, meetings, file sharing, screen sharing, but doing it more topically based. And think about that like, think about that like your group text, right? Like in your group text, I don't know the phone numbers of my neighbors. I just know I have a neighbor's group text, right? But it's topical. It's got a history. It's persistent. I can keep all my pictures in there. I can go to the other view and see the image that somebody sent me 6 months ago. I can go back and look at the history. And the younger part of our workforce is coming in communicating that way. And those tools are going to be a required part of the communications experience in the coming years. So the names to look out for are Slack, Microsoft Teams, fastest growing product in the history of Microsoft right now, which is an attachment to Office 365. Cisco has their own play under WebEx right now. These are tools that we will all be in the conversation on when we're having the UC conversation over the course of the next couple of years. So spiff yourself up on that. It's going to get really interesting. And what's interesting about those providers is none of them really want to be voice providers. Right. So Microsoft is very friendly to somebody like Evolve IP, providing the dial tone into a Microsoft Teams collaboration experience. So the rules are going to change a little bit. I think that $30 all-in UC seat is going to become more a customers made a decision on Workstream Collab. Hey, voice vendor, do you play nice with it? So I think that that's going to change over the coming years. And then the second area, just to really quickly define, I think we're getting to that inflection point where businesses will have more applications in the cloud than they'll have applications that have to be installed on a local machine. And that is an interesting idea for really this whole workspaces concept. That I used that term earlier, but I really didn't get a chance to define it. The challenge with moving all the applications out to the cloud is, hey, great, less infrastructure to worry about. But now my employee has an identity on 8 different clouds, 8 different passwords. They're not integrated. They quit. What do? I have to manage that. They get themselves locked out. They're applying different password standards. This becomes a security problem for the IT department, a headache for the end user. So emerging technologies like identity management are going to regularly become part of our story. Right. So, yeah, you can help resell the Office 365, but how does the business maintain one identity in the cloud for Chris, right? So that I can turn Chris on, I can turn Chris off. If Chris puts his password incorrectly, it shuts them off everywhere, right? An emerging opportunity. It just so happens that we've made some significant investments in that space on a product that we call Clear Login, which is first central to unifying all of our own products. But as far as we know, we'll be the first cloud provider to go out there who will enable our customers to use our portal to log into other cloud applications that we don't support, like Salesforce or NetSuite or what have you, and leverage the Evolve IP portal and identity to access there, so the end user only has one cloud identity. So that's an emerging opportunity. You'll begin to hear us talking about it over the next couple of months, but something for our partners to be thinking about over the next couple of years.
Awesome. Well, it definitely seems as though Evolve IP is not going to stop evolving anytime soon.
Pun intended.
Pun intended. Scott, thank you so very much for your time today. We, for all of our folks listening at home, don't forget, when if you like what you've heard here, please reach out to Dana and team over at Evolve IP, and we will see you all next time on the Zoom.